Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. I am here, back with you again today to break down another true crime case. One of the crazier ones that we're probably ever going to have been talking about on our channel. I just said that, so weird. Probably one of the worst ones we have ever talked about on this channel. There we go. Annie, learn to speak. You are on a microphone. It's one of those days. I don't know if you can hear it. It's like pouring rain. I don't know why I'm wearing a tank top. I'm freezing. I've got a lot on my mind, and I'm about to unload on you. Anyways, for those of you who know who I am and know what 10 to Life is, welcome back. Happy to have you here today. For anybody who is brand new, never checked out the channel, never heard of me, have no idea who this blonde chick is on your screen, let me break it down for you. My name's Annie, and I hang out here with you guys, talk with you like we're friends, tell you about a true crime case that is bugging me, that has bothered me, that I've been researching, that my team's been researching, all of the things, and we just talk about it together. Like I said, today's case is really crazy, and I want to start by prefacing it a little bit about community, okay? We can all understand here on YouTube the sense of community, whether it's parasocial or real life. Community is community. God, stop saying community, Annie. Well, I'm going to say it again because sometimes we lean on our members of our communities to help us get through really difficult times. We lean on the people around us to hold us up, who help support us, help us heal any parts of us that maybe are broken or fractured. And then oftentimes we get to return the favor when we're in a better place. Hopefully that's how it works out. And hopefully along the way, our kindness doesn't get taken advantage of. Well, today's case is a story about a woman who leaned on others for support while simultaneously helping others with things in their lives. But then she realized that her kindness was being taken advantage of. And unfortunately, it had a deadly result. So guys, let's jump right in. Okay guys, I'm just gonna say it. Audiobooks are always better than the movies. I first learned about this when I listened to the audiobook of Gone Girl, like way before the movie even came out, and I was so psyched to go and see the movie. And even though it was good, it was just a total flop to me because the audiobook was so much better. Same with Girl on the Train. Like when she finally realized that the husband was the scumbag, the bad guy all along. I mean, it was just so good. And honestly, just about every other story that has ever been turned into a movie is so much better in audiobook form. I live for the thrillers and the mystery, and what I love about audiobooks is I actually feel like I'm there when I'm listening. I can hear the voices, I can visualize exactly what's happening. I mean, so much so that I actually feel bad for people who can't hear what I'm listening to because they just see me kind of going like making all these faces. I also love listening to different audiobooks that are nonfiction about cases that I'm researching, cases that I'm going to cover, because I just find it so much more informative. Now, the new title on my list is End of Story, and it's the same author as Girl in the Window, so I know it is going to be good. And I'm listening to all of them on Audible, who also happens to be sponsoring today's video. Audible is my go-to destination for all things mystery, thriller, suspense, I mean all the feels. And if thriller isn't your thing 100% of the time, that's totally okay, because Audible offers an incredible selection of audiobooks, podcasts, Audible originals, I mean, so much across every genre, from bestsellers and new releases to celebrity memoirs, mysteries, thrillers, motivation, wellness, business, and more. New members can get a free trial of Audible. Just go to audible.com/AnnieElise or text AnnieElise to 500-500 for your free trial. It is case sensitive. Members also get full access to a growing selection of included audiobooks, Audible originals, and podcasts. You can download included titles all you want. So go, listen, enjoy, and let me know what is on your list of titles, especially if it's a mystery or a thriller, because you know I live for that. Now, in order to understand this case better, we need to go back to the beginning of Deborah Chong's life. Deborah Chong is now 67 years old, as far as when this case took place. So her story takes place back when she was born in 1954. She was born originally as Mi Kun Chong, but she was known as Deborah Chong, and she was born in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Her family grew up pretty poor, and things weren't always easy for them. But Deborah always felt like she could do more, she could achieve more, and she could really make something of herself. She was incredibly smart, and she also always did well in school. So in the 1970s, Deborah moved to the UK so that she could study at Huddersfield Polytech. She eventually got married, and she and her husband moved to London. In London, they were able to find and build great financial success. They were able to build a new home, and Deborah was able to create the life that she had always dreamed of. Their life together was easy, and it was stable, which was the complete opposite of her life growing up. But unfortunately, that didn't really last long, because in the 80s, Deborah's husband suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. He was also still very young, only in his 40s. Now, the death of a spouse is so incredibly difficult, but Deborah, she had an especially hard time dealing with everything. After his death, her mental health started to deteriorate, and it really never stopped. As time went on and she began to get even more lonely, she started looking for more and more people to bring into her life to just help make her feel less alone. Deborah didn't necessarily care who these people were either. She just wanted to be around somebody. Now, as I might have mentioned, she was a very super kind person, so mixing her need to feel less alone and also spread kindness at the same time, she really started helping anybody that she could. If she met someone and they were having money issues, for example, or experiencing being unhoused, she would let them live in her home, rent-free. And at the time, she was living in a 2-story house with just one person. So, she had plenty of empty rooms for people to stay in. And she didn't care about what these people may have done or what their background was. She was fairly wealthy, and she had more money than she even needed. So oftentimes she would just offer money to people, and not just like $20 here and there. They were large amounts of money, although most people wouldn't accept the money because they could tell that Deborah may have been mentally unstable and they didn't want to take advantage of her. Like I mentioned earlier though, she was super kind, so she was the one to start a conversation with anyone and everyone. She didn't really care who they were. She just wanted to talk to people. And when I say anyone and everyone, I really mean it. And the entire neighborhood knew who she was because she would often invite people over to her house. They would come over for tea. They would talk with people. They would talk while they were walking up and down the street. Things like that. And she would also take it a step further because she would remember little things about people. And she'd really listen to what they had to say. And most people loved her for it because she truly made them feel like what they said and how they felt, it mattered. She was also a little eccentric, as I'm sure you can imagine. Neighbors said that Deborah could often be heard singing from inside her house. But aside from just being a super kind person, she was also a very, very devout Christian. She was a part of a few churches before eventually becoming a member of the Emmanuel Center Church. Once she joined the church, she became a part of the church's choir, and she was also a member of many different groups and ministries within the church, such as prayer groups, things like that. She was never afraid of sharing her beliefs with other people, and it was something that she would often become very animated speaking about. She was very passionate about it, so much so that sometimes it kind of freaked people out a little bit. She was so intense when she was talking about her beliefs that she would often become loud. She would become aggressive. In addition to ranting about her religion, she would also rant about politics and climate change, and her demeanor would seem almost volatile and violent when she would start on one of these tirades. People would sometimes view this as very threatening too. And at one point, Deborah was speaking with one of the women that was living with her at the time, and she became so loud and so in her face that this tenant no longer felt safe living with Deborah, and she even moved out because of it. Now, Deborah never hurt anyone, especially over her beliefs. She would just become a little bit too passionate sometimes. Although I do think that that may have had to do with her mental health and maybe not understanding social cues or social norms very well. I'm not sure. Now, even though her religion encouraged her to see the best in people, Unfortunately, it also caused her to be a little naive and sometimes get taken advantage of, especially by the people that she was helping. She firmly believed that all people were good and that all people should be kind to one another. A great sentiment, right? But because of this, she often could not understand why people would be mean to each other or do bad things. If she saw someone doing something wrong, she would often become extremely visibly upset about it. Her usual chatty and happy demeanor would just immediately change, and she would become distant. She would become quiet. To those around her, it was like her mind was in a totally different place. And the change was often so quick and so all of a sudden. It was like a light switch just turning on and off. She would stare into space. She wouldn't talk to the people around her. And she was just really genuinely bothered by people who were not kind. It really affected her. As the years went on, Deborah's physical and mental capabilities slowly and continuously began to deteriorate. She was having issues moving around, and her mind would sometimes go to a very dark place. She would act out of control, and people really couldn't understand why. But ultimately, what she needed was help, and she was having a really hard time finding it. She had a tenant who lived with her named David, and he helped her as much as he could. But he also knew that Deborah needed more serious help, and it wasn't something he could do. So in August of 2020, she met a woman named Gemma Mitchell. The two went to the same church, and they met through a prayer group. The two of them quickly bonded because each of them, they were very devout in their faith, to the extreme, and both of them took their religion very seriously. Gemma became aware of the issues that Deborah was experiencing, and because of this, only a month after meeting, Gemma became Deborah's official spiritual healer. Now, Gemma, who was 30 years younger than Deborah, had an entirely different upbringing. Her mother worked for the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office in Australia, and since she was a senior position, Gemma's family grew up very wealthy and very privileged. When Gemma was just 2 years old, her parents divorced, and she moved with her mom and her older sister to the UK. Now, Gemma was always described as a good person, and like Deborah, she also was extremely smart. She attended university at the King's College in London, and that's where she studied human sciences. While at college, Gemma made a name for herself too. She was extremely smart. She was an honors student. She took multiple classes in human anatomy, and even a few of them that required dissection of human cadavers, human bodies. A lot. Now, as freaky as that might sound to some of us, Gemma ended up being really good at it. So good, in fact, that she received the Hamilton Prize for Anatomical Excellence. That's an award that is given to people who exhibit extreme skill in dissecting human bodies, human cadavers. I just hate the word cadaver for some reason. I hate it. Now, it's a little bit of a weird award, but in that field, it's a very important award. So after attending King's College, Gemma attended the British School of Osteopathy, and she was studying to become an osteopath. Now, an osteopath is like a traditional doctor, except they believe in looking at the whole human body and system when they're trying to treat a problem. They don't just treat your symptoms, and they often rely on physically manipulating the skeletal system, and they believe that a lot of things like stretching and certain types of massages can treat illnesses and disease. So in 2019, after graduating from this school, Gemma moved back to Australia to practice osteopathy. She opened her own business, and she was very, very successful. She was able to buy a nice house, she had a booming business, and she was doing very well for herself. However, in 2015, she suddenly sold her business, and she moved back to London to live with her mom and sister. But there was one big problem here. Since her osteopathic license was not valid in the UK, she could no longer officially practice. So instead, she started advertising herself as a holistic type of healer and alternative practitioner. Gemma's life changed a lot after moving to London, and she changed a lot as a person as well. Her friends started noticing her behavior was getting strange, and she went from looking put together every day to just not looking put together at all. At one point, one of Gemma's siblings even filed a restraining order against her for harassment. Her behavior was just changing completely. The two of them had a lifelong rocky relationship leading up to the restraining order, though, but then, even after, Gemma didn't fully abide by the order, and even though she violated the restraining order, she ended up not receiving any sort of punishment for it. One of her newfound interests after moving to London was religion, something that she didn't have much of an interest in before. She was specifically interested in demons and evil spirits, and according to her ex-boyfriend, she had an extreme obsession with them. One time, Gemma went to church with a friend named Karen, and in the middle of service, she started screaming about demons being inside her, and she was begging the priest to perform an exorcism on her. Now, obviously, Karen was really disturbed by this. This wasn't the type of church where people were loudly chanting and moving around. I mean, it was a quiet and quote, normal service, if you will, which made Gemma's outburst just very, very uncomfortable. However, the priest listened to Gemma, put his hands on her, and tried to expel the demons from her. And when he did this, Gemma started screaming, crying, shaking, and just like thrashing around almost. So it completely freaked Karen out. She had never seen Gemma act or sound like this ever before. And this is a side note, but I do think that it's worth mentioning that Karen was only 16 years old at the time, and Gemma was in her mid-30s. So no offense to you 16-year-olds out there if you're watching. Hopefully you're not watching this because I don't know that it's appropriate, but no offense to any 16-year-olds, but I don't think many 30-year-old women would want to be friends with a 16-year-old. Now, what made it even weirder was that Karen had to cut off her friendship with Gemma because Gemma started secretly messaging Karen's boyfriend, who was also a teenager at the time. So obviously Gemma was starting to show a lot of very, very concerning and manipulative behaviors, to say the least. Gemma was also becoming so extreme in her beliefs that some of her friends called her a religious fanatic. As time went on, she seemed pretty disturbed and started alienating herself from others. She went from being this very happy, outgoing, bubbly person to just this antisocial recluse. Sometimes she would revert back to being very happy, but then she would get quiet and she would just shut down all over again. People often saw her silently crying, not making a sound, her stare just completely blank, and tears just running down her face. She spent most of her time reading her Bible or praying, and her physical appearance just started to get more and more disheveled as time went on. She tried many churches around the London area, and she eventually became a member at the Emmanuel Center Church, which was that same church that Deborah went to. So as Gemma and Deborah became closer and closer, Gemma realized how all-encompassing Deborah's issues were. She was struggling not only with her physical health, but her mental health as well. After knowing her for a short time, Gemma decided that she would become Deborah's mind, body, and spiritual leader. They would meet weekly for healing sessions, and Deborah thought that they were working for a little while. But Gemma's healing clearly wasn't enough because Deborah's mental health was rapidly declining. One of Deborah's siblings died at the beginning of 2021, which made things even worse, and eventually she had to be admitted into a psychiatric facility that spring. She had been sent to psychiatric facilities in the past, but this one, it was a more serious issue per se. At the beginning of 2021, she started to think that she had a relationship with Prince Charles, and also the Prime Minister of the UK at the time. She thought that she communicated with Prince Charles and Boris through YouTube, and she thought that they were sending special messages to her. She became fixated, obsessed with communicating with them, and would often write them letters. During that time, she was also barely eating or sleeping, so it was just like a recipe for disaster. She would stay up all night writing them letters, and she was so obsessive with writing them that they eventually caught the attention of the Fixated Threat Assessment Center. Now, the FTAC is affiliated with the UK's police force and is a mental health unit that tries to protect stalkers from further escalating their crimes. The purpose isn't to arrest or charge the stalkers, but to ensure that they get the help that they need. The organization recognizes that stalkers are often suffering from some sort of mental health problem, and they try to get people help before things get really bad. The unit tracks people who may be repeatedly going to the same place, like a celebrity's home. And they also track if someone is sending messages and letters to the same person over and over again. And that is exactly what happened to Deborah. The FTAC caught wind of Deborah's numerous letters that she was sending to Prince Charles and to Boris Johnson, and they started paying pretty close attention. Now, the letters, they didn't say anything too terrible, but Deborah did write that she was probably suffering from some sort of mental health issue. And there were so many letters that it was becoming concerning. So the FTAC contacted a mental health unit close to Deborah and told them what was happening. The mental health team contacted Deborah, who then agreed to be hospitalized. Her mental health was suffering significantly, and the doctors at the facility requested for her to stay longer than originally planned. She was eventually diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, and she was prescribed antipsychotic medication. In May, she was released and sent home, and the medication seemed to be helping her, but it also caused her demeanor to change drastically. She went from being extremely generous to not being so trusting of people anymore. She stopped offering people money, and she would actually refuse to help people who asked her at all. Now, I'm not really sure if the change in her behavior was because of paranoia or if it was the medication that was causing her to think more clearly and maybe realize that people had been taking advantage of her generosity for so long. But while her mental health was changing, so was her physical health, and it was just getting worse and worse. She was becoming so frail and so thin and having a very difficult time moving around by herself, and she eventually needed a walker. Now, during that time was when David, Deborah's tenant that we briefly mentioned earlier, contacted the mental health team that was working with Deborah, and he requested that they send somebody over to care for Deborah full-time. However, they were never able to send somebody to care for her before David ended up reporting her as missing on June 11th, 2021. David saw Deborah on the evening of June 10th, and everything seemed as normal as it could be. Nothing unusual was happening, and Deborah wasn't acting out of the ordinary. But when he got up the next morning and went to work, he didn't see her. That, too, wasn't out of the norm, except for when he got back home later that evening, he still couldn't find her. That's when he started to get very concerned. Deborah could barely get around the house by herself, so there was no way that she could be gone all day. Plus, David noticed that her phone and her glasses were still at the house. She would never leave the house without either of those things. And things started getting even stranger and more worrisome when David received a text message from Gemma. Gemma said not to worry about Deborah, that she decided to leave town for the year to be with her family somewhere near the ocean. Now, Gemma didn't say how she knew this or where Deborah would be exactly, just that she would be gone for the rest of the year and that she was somewhere near the ocean. But David realized how ridiculous this sounded. If Deborah truly was leaving for a year, she wouldn't leave her phone, her glasses, and numerous other personal belongings behind. Plus, he lived with Deborah and never saw her packing anything, nor did he ever hear her talking about going to go and be with her family. There was also just no logical way that she just got up and left the house by herself. She was way, way, way too frail to do that. So, at 10:48 p.m. on the night of June 11th, David reported Deborah as missing. The police began their search for Deborah, but they weren't having a lot of luck. Her disappearance was not reported in the media, which unfortunately happens to many elderly people who do go missing. It's generally assumed that older people go missing because of things like dementia, so oftentimes the media doesn't consider the story exciting enough to be reporting on it. So 2 days later, David reported her missing again. And after another 2 days, the police put out a post on social media with the hope that it would gain some traction and that people would start talking. But it didn't really have that effect. The police knew about the message that Gemma sent David and also heard about the close relationship that she had with Deborah, so the investigators tried to call Gemma. She didn't answer though, so they left her a voicemail. Gemma tried to call them back, and when they didn't answer, she left them a voicemail. And she said, "I tried to return your call yesterday. I was getting in touch to let you know that Deborah said that she was planning to stay with friends near her sister's family on the coast. She said that she felt neglected. This was on June 7th, 2021, and that she wanted to leave." So this message now matched the message that she had sent David. But something still just didn't feel right. So the police continued searching for Deborah. And then 17 days after she went missing, a horrifying discovery was made. Fast forward to June 27th, when a family was going for an innocent walk in Sulcombe. Sulcombe is a very small and wealthy beach resort tourist town in England, and it's about 200 miles away from London. The family was on a walking path, and at the end of that path, they made a terrible discovery. The body of a headless woman had been dumped in the bushes at the end of the pathway.
Emergency. Hi, I just found a body. Oh, go ahead, caller. What's your emergency? I just found a body.
Right, okay. A body, is it? Are they breathing?
No, they're dead. They look like they've possibly been there like a few days or something, with some flies and stuff.
Right, okay. Bear with me a second. Let's pop this on.
What's the road?
Yeah, what road are you on?
I'm in Salcombe.
You're in Salcombe, sorry. Let me have a look. I can populate, hopefully, where you are. So, Bennett Road, are you quite near the harbour?
We're up from North Sand Beach. Hang on, we'll just look at Google Maps.
Oh, okay, yeah, so I can see North Sand Bay.
Road.
Bennett Road, yeah, you are on Bennett Road.
The body was very badly decomposed, and the clothing on the body were way, way, way too big. Police were immediately notified, and they came to search the area. In the pockets of the clothing, investigators found scraps of paper with Bible verses on them. A purse was also found, and inside of it was a camera, also a shopping bag, and an orange rope. Then, 3 days later, on June 30th, they found the head. It was only a few feet away from where the body was found, but it was buried so deep in the bushes that the investigators, they initially missed it. Now, finding a dead body in and of itself is shocking, but it was especially shocking to find something like that in this quiet little beach town. So soon after the discovery of the body, it was identified as being Deborah's body. Her head had been very carefully and very meticulously cut off. There was no doubt that this was done by somebody who had a lot of experience dealing with medical instruments and also had experience with dissections. The cut was so clean that there was absolutely zero chance that animals could have done this, or even that an inexperienced person could have done it. This was deliberate. Her body was so decomposed that her cause of death wasn't immediately apparent, but they did think that she died from having her head cut off. So they performed an autopsy, which showed that she likely died from blunt force trauma. Her head looked like it had been beaten severely with this large object, and she also had bruised and fractured ribs. 2 bones from her spine were also missing, as well as her larynx, which is the tube in your throat that contains your vocal cords and allows you to breathe. I mean, a pretty horrifying discovery. Not only the dismemberment, but the missing pieces, the missing ailments, I don't know, the missing pieces, I guess is the best way you could say it, the missing part of her throat and part of her spine. It was bizarre. So as the investigation was unfolding, police began learning more information that would hopefully help them solve this crime. On the same day that Deborah's head was found, they were notified of a very strange message received by a missing persons organization. They received a message that Deborah had left her home willingly and that she was visiting her family near the ocean and that she would be gone for about a year. Now, this was really weird because Deborah's body was already found. So there was obviously no way that she was out visiting family. But what made this message even more weird was the sender. And who do you think sent this message? I'll tell you. None other than Gemma Mitchell. That's right. After Deborah's body was already found, Gemma was still telling people that she was out visiting family. Investigators had already started becoming suspicious of Gemma, but this made them even more suspicious, and they started looking very seriously into Gemma, who she was, what type of relationship she had with Deborah, things like that. They realized that just before Deborah went missing, she did something that likely made Gemma very, very angry. You see, investigators were able to access Deborah's emails and her text messages, both to and from Gemma. So reading these messages gave them a better idea of the relationship between these two women. As I said earlier, Gemma and Deborah met in August of 2020 at church. After they met, the two of them were texting constantly, and through these conversations, Gemma became Deborah's healer. But only a month after meeting, in September of 2020, Gemma started asking Deborah questions about her will. Who would inherit her home after Deborah died? What is in your will? Who will inherit money from Deborah? Now, asking somebody about their will only a month after meeting them is weird. I don't think I would even ask a friend something like that. Hell, I wouldn't even ask my brother or sister something like that. But no less if it's somebody who I haven't even really known for a month. However, Deborah didn't think that these questions were all that weird. She started asking Gemma for advice. Who should she leave her home to? How can she give it to someone and avoid the inheritance tax? And in one message, Deborah wrote to Gemma, "I'm honored to have you as my sister. Accept me as my friend and advise me." Gemma initially tells Deborah that it would be a good idea to give the money and Deborah's house to charity. But then she tries telling Deborah that she should give the money to Gemma and to her family. Gemma even said that she could create her own charity to avoid the inheritance tax. She also said that if Deborah gave her the money, she would be sure to give some of that to charity every single month. Now you might be wondering why Gemma is seemingly so obsessed with money. And the police, they were curious too. However, things started to make more and more sense once the investigators realized the financial trouble that Gemma was in. When Gemma moved back to the UK, she and her mom Hillary lived in a home that had been in the family for generations. The home was very large. It was worth about £1 million, which is about $1.2 million in United States in dollar format. But the home was in complete disarray. Now, like I said, the home had been in the family for a very long time, but it also had not been kept up with. It was completely falling apart. On top of that, it was full of trash, just not in good condition. So it seems like maybe Gemma came to the UK initially to help her mom with the house, but it was only made worse upon her arrival. Trash was everywhere. You couldn't even open doors to some of the rooms because they were just so full of stuff. And there was rotted food all over the kitchen. It was basically like a very bad hoarding situation. So instead of cleaning the home, they decided to build a third floor. They hoped that this would give them more space for them to put all of their stuff. So they hired contractors to build the third floor, and they paid them just over $200,000. The contractors started working on the house, but decided it was just too much work, and they left. They never gave Gemma and Hillary the money back either. So now they were out $200,000 and had this half-built third floor on this house. There was scaffolding left all over the house. The roof was open in some spaces, and walls and ceilings were only partially built. It was a disaster. So Gemma then contacted another contractor who said that they would be able to fix everything. They could do it all for $500,000. Gemma agreed to this and gave them an initial payment of $100,000. The problem was she wasn't able to make any more payments. So the builders packed up their stuff and they left. So in November of 2020, Gemma started telling Deborah more and more about her housing issues and how disgusting her house was, all of these things. Gemma talked and complained about this constantly, and it seemed like she was doing it almost to manipulate Deborah. The more that Gemma talked about it, the more Deborah seemed to feel bad for Gemma and feel bad for her family. So eventually Deborah said she would give Gemma $200,000, but that first she had to meet Gemma's mom, Hillary. So after Deborah met with Hillary, she agreed to give them the money. However, she had one requirement. After the house was repaired, it had to be used for Christian worship. Gemma and Hillary agreed to these conditions, and it seemed like their financial issues would soon be behind them. However, things changed right after Deborah got back from that psychiatric facility. As I mentioned earlier, Deborah's views about the money seemed to shift after this. She wasn't just letting anybody stay with her. She wasn't letting people live in her house rent-free, and she certainly wasn't giving people money like she used to. She was becoming much more private with her financial situation, and her overall views about money, they were just changing. And much to Gemma's dismay, Deborah changed her mind about loaning Gemma the $200,000. Deborah said she wasn't going to give them the money anymore, and this made Gemma extremely upset. And she repeatedly was messaging Deborah, trying to convince her to give them this money, saying things like, "It's God's plan," which clearly was meant as a form to manipulate Deborah. Gemma was so used to manipulating Deborah at this point. She likely saw Deborah as a very vulnerable target and knew that she could take advantage of that. Only a month after meeting, Gemma was asking her very personal, very private financial information. And then Gemma convinces Deborah that she should be her healer in mind, body, and spirit. She basically started coaching Deborah on how to live her life and controlled so many different aspects of it. She thought that she was finally able to control the financial aspect of it as well. And when that fell through, she desperately tried to use Deborah's religion against her, and she used God to pressure her. Gemma basically tried to make her feel guilty for not giving her the money. So after this, Gemma and Deborah basically only talked about the house and talked about money. Gemma wouldn't talk about anything else, and she was constantly hounding Deborah about giving her money. She needed it for the house, she needed it for these things, all of these promises that were broken. And Deborah actually brought up a pretty great solution. She told Gemma, sell the house, which does kind of make sense. I mean, they would make a huge profit off of the house and they could use it to start a new life elsewhere, build a new house elsewhere. Also, Gemma still owned her house in Australia. She could even sell that house and use that money to fix up their house here if they didn't want to get rid of it. It had been a house that was in their family for a long time, so I mean, it is understandable if they didn't want to sell it, but they couldn't rely on this generous donation from a friend to fix all of their problems. So Deborah kept trying to convince Gemma to sell the house and enjoy the money that they would make from it. But Gemma wasn't convinced, and she continued to hound Deborah. On June 8th, 2021, at 1 a.m., just days before Deborah was reported as missing, Deborah sent Gemma a message that said, "Until you sold the house, I won't want you to come to me or the house. I'm stressed to the core." Gemma replied back to this message, "Peace to you. God has a plan and a purpose for this dwelling. Apologies that the quotes cause you any uncertainty about your decision." Now, this message still has a little bit of a manipulation element to it because Gemma says that God has a plan and a purpose for this dwelling, which to me is another example of her trying to use religion to manipulate Deborah. She was trying to make it seem like God wants to do something important with this house, and therefore Deborah should give Gemma the money to make God's plan happen. Then, the morning of Deborah's disappearance on June 11th, Gemma messaged her asking if they could meet up and if they could talk. Deborah said that they could, but that she was not talking about the house or any of the money, she wasn't going to talk about any of it under any sort of circumstances. So Gemma said fine, that they wouldn't talk about it. So Deborah said, yeah, okay, then come over. Now, fortunately for the police, there are security cameras all over London. It is estimated that people in London are caught on CCTV at least 70 times a day. And there are almost 1 million security cameras there. I mean, it is like Fort Knox. There are so many cameras that it would be very easy for the police to track somebody's entire day from start to finish. And that's exactly what they did for Gemma. At around 6:23 a.m., Gemma was caught leaving her home wearing a backpack and also pulling a very large suitcase behind her, a blue suitcase to be exact. The suitcase seemed very light, and Gemma wasn't having any trouble pulling it. Gemma pulled that suitcase all throughout the streets of London, took it on public transport, and even slightly changed her appearance halfway through her journey. She removed her backpack and seemingly put it in the suitcase. She also put on a hat and a face mask. She arrived at Deborah's house around 8 a.m., and she was inside the house for about 5 hours. At around 1:13 p.m., Gemma was caught again on CCTV leaving Deborah's house. Her clothes were different this time, though. She was carrying a red and a blue bag, which she didn't have before. She was still carrying the suitcase, but something didn't seem quite right. Before, the suitcase looked empty. Gemma was pulling it with her, behind her with ease. It didn't seem like it was a struggle. But now, it was kind of bulging at the seams. It was lumpy, and Gemma was really struggling to pull it behind her. Gemma walked around London, lugging this bag behind her for 2 hours. She tried calling a cab 9 times before one finally came and picked her up. The cab dropped her off at her neighbor's house, and then she lugged the suitcase back to her house. Then she placed the suitcase in her garden. She went inside before emerging later that night. She went to the hospital because she had a broken finger, and she said she broke it by accidentally slamming it into a car door. 2 weeks later, on June 26th, Gemma was seen getting into a rental car at her house and putting that same suitcase in the back seat. She was seen driving throughout London before getting on the highway and heading in the direction of that small beach town. Halfway through the trip, she was seen again on CCTV footage at a service station, which is in an area where drivers can stop, they can rest, they can get gas, food, refuel, all of those things. Apparently, Gemma had blown out a tire and called AA, which is basically the UK's version of AAA if you're from America. So she stopped at the service station to meet the AA mechanic. Investigators found out who this AA mechanic was, and they brought him in for questioning. He said that Gemma was acting really weird the entire time that he was helping her, and it was like she wanted him to leave as soon as possible. She said she wasn't sure exactly where she was going, but she wanted to sleep in her car, and she wanted to watch the sunrise before going on a walk. She refused to let him open the trunk of her car, and she even made him put the old tire in the back seat of her car rather than the trunk. He also said that when he arrived, Gemma was sitting in the car with all of the windows down. Now, this normally isn't strange, but it was pouring rain that day, and she was just sitting there with all of the windows wide open. Investigators were able to see her sitting in the car with the windows down on the CCTV footage. They guessed that Gemma was probably trying to air the car out because of a certain smell, a certain type of decomposition odor that may have been coming from the trunk. So she left the service station, and the car that she rented was again seen on CCTV footage right near the area where Deborah's body was found. And Gemma wasn't seen again until early the next morning, when she was once again caught on CCTV footage when she arrived back home at 7 a.m. on June 27th. So all of this evidence against Gemma convinced investigators that they had found the person that murdered Deborah. So on July 6th, a week after Deborah's head was found, Gemma was arrested at her home. It was early in the morning, and it took a while before she actually came and answered the door. In fact, it took so long that the police actually started trying to break her door down. When she did answer the door, she looked a freaking mess. She was disheveled, and she did remain relatively calm, but the police then informed her that she was being arrested and being charged with the murder of Deborah. She didn't ask many questions, and she went with the police without issue.
Police! Hello there.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, good. There's no answer. Sorry, what's your name?
Sorry, I'm asleep.
Are you Gemma?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, Gemma. Just put your hand a second.
Sure, sure.
Come on a second.
Sorry, can I ask
Gemma, do you want to come up?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just want to see them.
Hand just see your hands. Alright, Gemma, at this moment, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. Okay, you don't have to say anything, but you may have a defence. Do you want to mention one question, something which you later rely in court? Anything you do say may be given evidence, okay? Once you're in your cuffs,
Am I allowed to...
I'll go explain everything to you. Okay?
Should I get some
Yeah,
shoes?
sorry. What? If
you want one sec-
inside.
Who's inside at the moment?
Mother.
Your mother?
Anyway,
Okay.
is it?
If you want to... Oh, can someone lift that up?
Yeah. Let's step back inside.
Is anyone else inside? Just your mum?
Yeah.
There is someone else inside,
No,
or just
that's
your
just
mum?
my mum, yeah.
Alright, do you want to... Should I bring her out, or...
Bring her in.
Bring her in?
For a minute.
Well,
yeah.
we're just going to come in for a sec,
Yeah,
okay?
Sure.
Gemma was taken back to the station where she was questioned, but she continually replied, no comment. No comment to every single question when she was asked.
They've said that the person driving the Volvo waited in the car all that time with the windows down and the front door open, the passenger door open, when it was literally chucking it down with rain and it was windy. Why is that, Gemma?
No comment.
The car stank, didn't it, Gemma?
No comment.
Stunk of a dead person.
No comment.
Stunk of Deborah's decomposing body. Is that right, Gemma?
No comment.
With Gemma in custody, the police could now search her home, And that's when they found even more and more evidence against her. Twisted evidence. The state that her home was in was even worse than the police originally thought. It was absolutely filthy and completely disgusting. It took a while to search through everything before they found key pieces of evidence. They found a calendar that Gemma had written on it, and on June 26th, she had written 8 a.m., collect body bag, see letter, will copy, 2-hour walk. They also found a huge pile of Deborah's personal items and the red and blue bag that Gemma was seen leaving Deborah's house with. This bag was later determined to be Deborah's, and investigators figured that Gemma had used this bag to carry all of Deborah's personal items and her paperwork when she left. Investigators found Deborah's passport, driver's license, debit card, and even her credit card. They also found PDF copies of Deborah's original will from 2017, which stated that she wanted all of her money and her house to be donated to her church after she died. They found multiple legal books about how to write wills, and then they found a will that Gemma had clearly forged in Deborah's name. It was written very similarly to the one in 2017, but it had a few key things changed. In this will, it stated that 95% of her estate, which was worth £700,000, would be given to Gemma, and the remaining 5% would, coincidentally, be given to Gemma's mom, Hillary. Investigators searched Gemma's computer, and they found that the will that she made was created on her computer on July 1st. Gemma had printed the will and had forged Deborah's signature. Gemma had also forged numerous other signatures as well for this will, and one of those signatures was from one of Gemma's neighbors, Virgil. And investigators discovered that Gemma had even more connections to Virgil. He had died a while before all of this happened. And after he died, Gemma somehow managed to get into his home and steal his cell phone and passport. She used the signature on his passport to forge his signature on Deborah's will. She then called the cell phone company, pretended to be Virgil, and convinced them to turn the phone back on and to activate the SIM card. This was the phone that she took with her when she got that rental car and drove to the beach town. It was also the phone that she had with her on the day of Deborah's disappearance because she left her own cell phone at home. Police also discovered that Gemma rented the car in Virgil's name and had also used her mother's transit card when she was taking public transportation on the day of Deborah's disappearance. So she was actively taking measures to cover up her steps. She was trying to make it seem like Virgil was the one who rented the car and went to this beach town, and she was trying to make it seem like her mom was the one going on public transportation. But the most damning piece of evidence that they found was that same blue suitcase that they saw Gemma carrying around London on the day of Deborah's disappearance. The suitcase had been cleaned and was outside, sitting on top of her neighbor's shed, and it was drying in the sun. It was now empty, and Deborah's DNA was never found inside that suitcase, but there was a bloody tea towel that was found in the pocket of the suitcase, and the blood on that was a match for Deborah. Now, police never found out what actually happened between Deborah and Gemma behind closed doors, but they did have a strong guess. They believed that Gemma went to Deborah's house and started an argument about the money. When things got heated, she hit Deborah over the head, which ultimately killed her. And things just got even worse and get even worse because if you remember, the autopsy showed that Deborah had fractured ribs. So investigators think that this happened when Gemma was trying to force Deborah's body into the suitcase. She probably found that Deborah couldn't fit, so she twisted her body and tried folding it to make it fit. They also think that Gemma cut off Deborah's head to make her fit in that suitcase better. Again, she probably realized that she wouldn't fit, so instead, she meticulously cut her head off to make her body fit in this suitcase. I mean, after all, she did receive accolades for her skill in dissection, right? So someone with extreme skill in that area had to be the one who cut off Deborah's head. Investigators also believe that during the struggle, Gemma had hurt her finger, which is why she went to the hospital later that evening. They did not believe that Gemma just hurt her finger in the car door like she originally claimed. This was probably an injury that occurred during the cover-up of her crime. Investigators aren't sure why Gemma kept the suitcase in her garden for so long and waited a full 2 weeks before disposing of Deborah's body. They also don't think that Gemma intended to leave Deborah's body where she did. They think that the flat tire threw her off schedule, so that by the time she got to the beach town, it was so late that she just had to find somewhere to quickly dump Deborah's body. She found a pathway, walked to the very end, threw Deborah's body there, and then left. They figured that she picked that beach town because it was near the ocean, which is where she was telling people that Deborah went. It was also such a safe and secluded town, they think that she hoped that the shock of finding the body there would throw the investigators off and make them start looking for suspects in that area. Gemma remained in jail, and on September 28, 2021, she pleaded not guilty. In December of that year, the judge set the trial date for September of 2022. However, her trial would eventually be pushed back to October due to various worker strikes that were going on at the time. The trial eventually came, and the prosecution argued that Gemma killed Deborah for money, a tale as old as time. Her house was falling apart, and she thought that she could manipulate Deborah into giving her money, but when that didn't happen, Gemma became angry and decided that the only course of action would be to kill Deborah. During the trial, the prosecution heavily relied on the fact that Gemma was also extremely skilled in dissection. They even noted that Gemma wrote on her professional website that she was attuned to subjects in neuroanatomy, genetics, and the dissection of human cadavers. The prosecution presented all of the CCTV footage. The AA mechanic who helped Gemma with the flat also testified. He claimed that Gemma was acting weird, confused, and also said that her car had an old, musty smell. And Gemma was no help to her defense team. She did not provide them with any evidence that would prove her innocence, and instead left it up to them to conjure up a story that would claim she was innocent in all of this. Their biggest argument was that there was no physical DNA evidence to suggest that Deborah was in that suitcase ever. Even though that bloody towel was found in the suitcase pocket, there wasn't any evidence on the actual suitcase itself. Deborah's DNA wasn't found anywhere in the suitcase, so how could she have ever been in it? Gemma's defense also argued that she had no financial reasons to kill Deborah. Her family's home was worth a lot of money. She had her own home in Australia, and she had almost $100,000 in personal savings. So why would she kill Deborah for money when she clearly had enough of it herself? They even questioned a pathologist and asked him if Deborah's injuries could have happened from a bad fall, and if the fall is what killed her. The pathologist said yes, she could have sustained broken ribs from a bad fall, but that didn't explain how she got decapitated. So the trial ended on October 21st, 2022. The jury deliberated for only about 7 hours, and on October 27th, Gemma was found guilty for the first-degree murder of Deborah Chong. Her sentencing was the next day, and the hearing was televised, and it was actually the very first time that a convicted murderer from England and Wales had their sentencing televised. A law had recently changed that allowed media cameras in the courtroom, but they had to ensure that the jurors and the various witnesses would not be shown on TV in order to protect their privacy. Deborah's sister Amy joined the sentencing hearing through video. Deborah's nieces, Pinky and Yinky, as well as her nephew Ryan, also joined the video call. Amy read a victim impact statement, and it read, "Deborah's death was a shock to us all. It was difficult to comprehend how it could have happened to her. Although we are not close due to certain differences of opinion with regard to religion, it saddens me that she had to go through such a horrifying ordeal and tragic death. I hope she gets what she deserves. She is the crazy one who steals people's belongings after they died. We still do not understand how she died. Did she suffer? The mystery will haunt me forever." Amy also said that she suffers from extreme nightmares and that her sister's death has left a huge bottomless hole in her life. The judge who was sentencing Gemma said that he thought that she was extremely devious and noted that Gemma showed very little emotion during the entire trial and said that she didn't even seem the slightest bit remorseful. He said that Gemma killed Deborah for financial gain. And the judge discussed all of the evidence against Gemma, the CCTV footage showing her going to Deborah's home, the footage showing her leaving Deborah's home, the footage from the service station, the footage near the area where Deborah's body was found, and Deborah's numerous personal items that were found at Gemma's home. He said that he would basically ignore the old restraining order that had been against Gemma and wouldn't consider that when thinking of her sentencing length, because during sentencing, a person's past crimes are often considered, and depending on the crime, if someone doesn't have a criminal past, they might receive a lower sentence and vice versa. The judge said that he had to consider that this was Gemma's first offense, and that before the murder, she was a person of good character. So he sentenced Gemma to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 34 years. However, it is highly unlikely that Gemma will ever leave prison. Gemma's mom, Hillary, has continually maintained Gemma's innocence.
She is innocent, and I know that, and I'm going to go to the top. I'm not accepting this because it's not right. She is innocent. I know it.
In her opinion, the CCTV footage and all of the other evidence wasn't enough to convict Gemma. Hillary thinks it was ridiculous that Gemma was found guilty, being that there was no physical DNA evidence that linked her to this crime. She continues to claim that Gemma had the suitcase because she was going to have a solo beach day that day. She said that in the suitcase there were snacks, towels, and even a beach umbrella. She claims to have watched Gemma pack the suitcase. She also says that when she left Deborah's home, the other bag was full of items like towels and china, all from Deborah's home. Now, honestly, her story of what happened is kind of ridiculous. I mean, who would carry a suitcase to the beach? Can you imagine trying to lug that thing through the sand? I mean, no way. A suitcase would be the last item that I would ever bring to the beach. But in the end, her story doesn't really even matter because it's not like that will be what could get Gemma out of prison. It's just extremely sad to think that Deborah struggled most of her life. She was someone who clearly had good intentions, a good heart, and wanted the best for the world. Unfortunately, somebody recognized that generosity and decided to take advantage of it. I think it's also evident that Gemma likely had some mental health issues of her own, but that doesn't dismiss what she did, not at all. Many people suffer from mental health issues every single day and never decide to callously take the life of another person. But I'm curious to know what you guys think about this case. Do you think that it happened over a fight over money? Or do you think that this was entirely premeditated and Gemma went to Deborah's house with the intention of killing her, like some of the evidence suggests? Why go with a suitcase if that's not your plan? I don't know. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode. If you enjoy the content and you appreciate the case coverage, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It's totally free. It's just a free way to support and to make sure that you don't miss any future episodes. All right, guys, thanks again. And until the next case, stay safe. Bye.